Yes, I was asked to look and test the functionality as being similar to the weapon that was actually used. And was it a common weapon as to how it functioned from the standpoint of cycle of operation. These are technical words, and I'll explain. And the ejection pattern and other issues associated with stippling. In other words, the powder that comes out of the muzzle. Take a look at those and see what you can tell us particular to that weapon.
What did you find?
I did about 5 different tests, one of which is a trigger pull test. When you do armor's work or you repair weapons or you try to find if something's wrong with a weapon or you test a weapon, these are a series of tests that are very common and not unusual, but it actually deals with the issue of functionality of a weapon. A trigger pull test.
Sir, can you just raise your voice just a little bit, please?
A trigger pull test, we put a gauge on the trigger and we mount the weapon in a specialized vise that holds it so it doesn't move. And what we're trying to do is an accurate, repetitive trigger pull or pounding. Semi-automatic weapons, like the one in question here, has a single action and a double action rating. Double action simply means that the hammer's forward, single action, the weapon is caught. What that means is it takes more trigger pressure for you and I to pull a double action, but when it cycles to a single action, it's a lighter question, it's easier to shoot. So in this particular weapon here, we cycled through 2 different types of ammunition to ensure there was consistency. And we did the trigger pull. We had 9.5 pounds for double action.
And just to be clear, double action requires more force,
More
correct?
pressure. And that was 9.5 pounds. For a single action, it was 4.5 pounds. So a significant difference. In other words, the weapon's easier to shoot, faster to shoot, give or take the distance. And that's the one test that we do. We did that twice. We did it before we loaded the weapon, and we fired 54 rounds through it. It was 6 fully loaded magazines plus 1 in the chamber, and tested again after where there was no difference. Basically, the poundage is the same, which was consistent with what the manufacturer said the poundage is. In other words, it was within what the manufacturer said would be reasonable for that weapon.
So would it be fair to say that the initial pull is a double action and the remainder a single action? Is that right?
Yes, on a semi-automatic pistol, first round is always double action unless the individual who's firing the weapon actually cocks the weapon to put it into single action mode. So normally speaking, when a person draws a weapon, like a police officer or someone has a weapon, they'll draw and point and shoot in the double action mode first. Then the weapon is actually now cocked again, and then the single action pulls are back down from 9.5 pounds down to 4.5 pounds, which is an easier, lighter to pull.
Pursuant to your investigation regarding the information that we provided you, did you learn if the weapon at issue utilized all the projectiles, all the bullets in it on the incident date?
Yes, according to the investigator's report, the weapon had the capability of being loaded with a magazine that contains 8 rounds, and all 8 shell casings were ejected from the weapon and were contained, generally speaking, in that small, short area that I discussed earlier.
What does that suggest to you with regards to the functionality of that firearm?
That is indicative of the fact that the weapon had no malfunctions. In other words, it didn't jam, and that means that only 4 rounds were shot. All 8 were cycled through the weapon and fired exactly as the way it was designed.
Were you able to review any documentation or any reports drafted by the prosecution's crime scene investigator unit that did the testing on the firearm?
Yes, they did a sketch that depicted where the locations of the 8 shell casings were at the time when they found it, and they did their examination of that particular crime scene. And they did a sketch, and they did measurements of the kitchen area, and then they did measurements of the area just exterior to it. So they did basically a foot and length and depicted the things they found in that location by sketching.
Was there anything in any of the documentation that we provided to you that would suggest that there was any defects or any mechanical misfunctions with the firearm that was used on August 8th, 2013?
Sustained. Ask an open-ended question, please.
Did you learn that there were any malfunctions or anything that was potentially wrong with the firearm that was used on August 8th, 2013?
No, based on the expended shell casings there, the loaded weapon, 8 rounds, functioned as was designed, and all 8 rounds were fired from the weapon, evident by the 8 rounds of casing. Otherwise, the weapon would have been jammed. It would have been a partially loaded magazine. There might have been a shell casing stuck into that portion of the weapon.
Was there any indication with regards to any of the abnormalities that you just described to the jury? Was there any indication of the abnormalities that you just mentioned to the jury regarding gun jamming or anything like that that was present on August 8th, 2013?
No.
The firearm that you tested, that you did your analysis on, was that the firearm that was used on August 8th, 2013?
No, it wasn't.
Do you feel comfortable testifying with regards to the firearm that you utilized at your lab, at your facility?
Yes. My opinion is that the testing we did on a brand new weapon is exactly the same because the laboratory in Miami-Dade Forensic Lab tested the weapon, and they tested from the standpoint of cycle operation. All we basically did was copy their test and enhance it with some other things.
So is it your opinion that there's no discrepancy by using the firearm that you used in this analysis versus the firearm that was taken into custody?
No.
Sustained.
Is there any distinction between the firearm used in your facility versus the one used on August 8th, 2013?
No.
Did you do any analysis with the firearm that you used to provide information that would let a jury know how quickly someone could fire all 8 projectiles from that firearm?
Yes.
Overruled.
Yes, we did.
Tell the members of the jury what you did and what your result was.
What we did is we loaded the magazine with 8 rounds, which is the condition it was when it was involved in this incident. We chambered 1 round. That put 1 round in chamber, 7 rounds in the magazine. And then we picked a 5-foot distance to a target. And what we attempted to do is, because of the distance the investigators told us, we just pointed the gun to the target and did 6 cycles, firing as fast as we could while attempting to control the weapon from the standpoint of reasonable accuracy at that distance. The first round was double action. The other subsequent rounds were at 4.5 pounds or single action. And we did that 6 times, took the average, and it came out to 3.1 seconds as an average. In other words, all 8 rounds could be fired in approximately 3 seconds, okay, 3.5 seconds. For a person with no particular tactical skills because of the proximity of the target that we were using within the confines of 5 foot, 5.5 foot. And that averaged out to roughly 3.5 seconds, 3.1 seconds for all 8 rounds. First action one being the double action. The single actions are a lot easier to pull because it's just very slight amount in the distance. It created a zone about 3 inches, a circle within that confined target.
You mentioned the fact that this was within a confined space. You said 5 feet, correct?
I think it's 5 point, we did it at 5 foot, but knowing that we were dealing with a space that was 5.6 and 3.6 as diagrammed by the investigator.
Explain to the members of the jury why that matters.
Well, at that distance, you really don't have to, like, point a weapon. If I take time to bring the weapon up and use the sights and aim, it takes longer. At that distance, in the close proximity, it takes less time because I'm not really that far away from the target, and I can shoot faster, okay? And that accounts for the rate of fire, which we determined through our tests.
Are you familiar with a term called combat situation?
As to firearms, if you ask me, yes.
Yes. Explain to the members of the jury what that is.
There are different procedures showing how an individual can handle a weapon stance as far as shooting a weapon. Combat or combat stance is how a person would stand and point a weapon. Most people shoot with two hands because they're comfortable. Basically what it means is their front leg or lead leg for a right-handed shooter would be forward, their left side would be to the rear, and they would be in a bladed stance or a combat stance, if that makes, that is understandable.
Let me ask you a hypothetical. Let's say within 5.5 foot distance, which is roughly kind of similar. I mean, I'm just eyeballing it, the distance that we are between between yourself and myself, correct?
Yes.
That's about right. I mean, we're eyeballing it, but that sounds about right. In a hypothetical, if I had a firearm, okay, and you were standing where, do you mind if you stand up there?
That's fine. Sir, you may
Do you mind,
stand.
Mr. Peters? Walk one step closer. Okay. Now, if we're both within this 5 foot radius, okay, hypothetically, if I have a hypothetical firearm and you have a hypothetical weapon, okay, and you start attacking me, is that something, how would you describe that scenario? Is that a combat situation?
Objection, speculation.
Only if you know, sir.
Yes, that would be an aggression toward me, and I would perceive that as an aggressive action. I would have to defend myself.
If you were teaching one of your courses of law enforcement officers and you were given a hypothetical, you go ahead and take a seat, Mr. T. You were given a hypothetical that one of your subjects says, I'm 5 feet away from somebody, and they present a knife, and they make a movement towards me. How would you describe that scenario to that student?
That would be an assaultive action that would require some defensive action on the individual involved.
Wait, and is that because the person assaulting could potentially harm them?
Yes, either by life endangering or serious injuring.
Now, you're not here because you like Mr. Padilla and myself, correct?
Objection, leading.
Sustained.
Okay. Did we retain you guys? Did we retain you guys to come down here?
Yes,
You're a private organization, a private firm,
yes.
and we paid you to come and testify today.
Objection, leading.
Sustained.
What did we do to facilitate having you come here? What did we give you?
I provide a resume, and if that resume fits the needs of their expert witness needs, then I'm retained by them, and I submit a fee schedule, and they reimburse me based on my fee schedule as to the hours I use to work on the case.
And Mr. Teaser, where's your home of operation?
San Francisco, California.
And you flew from San Francisco here to testify for us, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And how much has our team paid you for your services?
As of today, well, as of this point in time, roughly $2,700.
And does the fact that we provided you a fiduciary benefit, which is what normally happens in your field, does that affect the testing that you did in any way, shape, or form?
No.
Would that gun have shot any slower or faster if we would have paid you more or less money?
No, we do exactly what we have to do as required by the testimony or testing, and payment has nothing to do with how we bias a particular report to fit the prosecution or the offense.
Is it your expert opinion that Derek Medina on August 8th, 2013 was in a combat situation in his kitchen?
Objection.
Sustained.
No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Can we come back on respectfully?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. You testified on direct examination that you work as an expert to help explain things to juries that may not be within their common knowledge, right?
Yes.
Things like firing a gun, right?
Yes.
And things like shooting and killing someone, right?
I didn't speak to killing someone. I spoke to shooting weapons.
All right. So you work with police officers, you said. You train police officers, correct?
Yes.
All right. And you've been doing that, you said, for about 28 years? 38, excuse me.
38 years.
Okay. And you were a FBI agent as well?
Yes.
All right. And when you were asked what issues or areas you are an expert at, one of the things you said was use of force, correct?
That is correct.
All right. Now, the first thing that you testified about in this case was your test firing of a gun, right?
Yes.
And it was a Bersa 380 caliber.
Yes.
Same make, model as the type of weapon that was used to kill Jennifer Alfonso in this case, right?
That is correct.
All right. But you did not test the actual gun that was used to kill Jennifer Alfonso, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you would agree that guns can change over a period of time, depending on how old they are or how well they're maintained. Would you agree with that?
That's the first statement.
Okay. So you can't say for sure whether the functioning of the weapon that you tested was similar or not to the gun that killed Jennifer, correct?
No, not specifically because I didn't test that, but I relied on the Miami-Dade Forensic Laboratories report saying the weapon functioned as designed.
And so you're aware that the police do have the gun in question in their custody, correct?
Yes.
And you're aware that there are procedures in the Miami-Dade Crime Lab for experts like yourself, if they so wish, to test fire weapons that are in evidence, correct?
Objection, Judge. I have a motion.
Let's go sidebar. Ladies and gentlemen, please remember that the state of Florida, and only the state of Florida, has the burden of proof in this case. The defense does not need to prove or disprove anything. One moment, Mr. Dunn. You may continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. So, Mr. Tisa, we agree that you did not test the actual gun that was used in this case to kill Jennifer Alfonso, which is in the custody of the Miami-Dade Police Department, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I'm going to object to what we object to sidebar.
Oh, Sustained to what was sidebar, but to that question overruled.
Thank you, Judge.
And you also spoke a little bit about the casings that come out of a gun when it's discharged, right?
Yes,
Casings are the things that shoot off to the right with each shot, correct?
Objection, Judge. This goes beyond the scope of direct examination.
Overruled.
the ejected casings based on the weapon are ejected to the right because most weapons are right-handed ejection from the standpoint of once it's fired and completed its cycle of operation.
Right. So the ejection port on this particular firearm was to the right, correct?
That is correct.
All right, as are most guns, most
Yes.
pistols, right? Okay. And you would agree that when casings eject, they eject with some force and velocity, right?
Objection, Judge, calls for speculation.
Only if you know, sir. Do not guess or assume. Only if you know.
They're ejected as to the velocity, or to the velocity, it's almost hard to determine, okay?
Okay. Would you say it would be fair if you know that casings generally, unless they hit something, that they would generally eject about 3 to 5 feet away from a gun after they are
Objection.
shot out?
Calls for speculation.
Again, sir, only if you know. If you do not know, it is fair to say, I do not know.
No, that statement's not correct. You have to test each weapon and test it so you get an average, because most of the weapons in the same category, like I take 3 Bursas and test them, they'll generally be close. If I take another weapon, it could be significantly different from the standpoint of the pattern. So you have to test a type of weapon. If they're by the same manufacturer, then you're going to basically pretty much get the same pattern ejection.
Now, you said that you reviewed the documents from the police investigation that were provided to you by defense counsel, right?
That's correct.
And included among those documents were indications that the gun fired 8 times, right?
Yes,
Because there were 8 casings found on the scene, correct?
that's correct, yes.
All right. And that's all the bullets this gun held, 8, right?
No, you could put 9 in there. You can put a magazine with 8 chamber round, and then reload the magazine and put that back in. But that means you got a loaded weapon with a round in the chamber.
But you can't tell anything about the positions or locations of the shooter just by looking at the casings, isn't that correct?
Generally not.
Because they
With-
roll around and move, right?
Depends on the circumstances. Let me, so if I can qualify that answer. It's very difficult to see, when you test a weapon, you test it for the basic ejection pattern, and you measure that. Then you take that basic ejection pattern and put it into the circumstances in which the weapon was used, okay? And it's because medical people, the police officers, when they get to a scene, it's not unusual they stomp, kick, or move something. And it could be that they actually moved the actual location of weapons. In this particular situation, to answer your question, it was so confined, the short distances by length and width, basically all the shell casings, even though they ejected to the right and other people, were all still contained in that location. It still ejected to the right, it still was one location. So that means the weapon was fired in close proximity.
Now, when you testified about the rate of fire tests that you performed, who actually test-fired the weapon during those tests?
I do.
All right. And you're a very experienced shooter, I would assume, correct?
I shoot more than the average person, yes, that's fair statement.
Right. I mean, you have an extensive law enforcement background, correct?
Yes,
So you fired a lot of guns, right?
yes.
All right. So your ability to fire a gun doesn't necessarily translate into another person's ability to fire a gun, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And you were asked also on direct examination about the term combat situation. You recall that?
Yes,
And you were also asked a hypothetical about what would or would not constitute a combat situation. You recall that?
yes.
All right. So let me ask you a hypothetical of my own, if I could. If, hypothetically speaking, a woman is standing in the kitchen of her own home, alone, by herself, and her husband walks in, brandishing a gun in his hand,
Overruled.
if that woman, while standing alone in her kitchen, is suddenly confronted by her husband walking in with a gun in his hand when she was just standing there doing nothing, would you consider that woman to be in a threatening combat situation?
Yes, if he's doing some action that would warrant her to be fearful of the situation, yes.
And holding a gun in front of someone, you would agree, brandishing a firearm, even if you're not pointing it at someone, that's a pretty threatening situation. You would agree.
Judge calls for speculation.
Ask the hypothetical again.
And
I'm sorry.
would you agree then, Mr.
Yes.
Tisa, that in my hypothetical, if that husband came in and confronted that wife who had been in that kitchen by herself doing nothing, and that husband came in brandishing that gun, would you agree in that hypothetical, the mere act of holding a gun, even if you're not necessarily pointing it, that could be interpreted by that wife as a very threatening situation?
Yes, but you're asking me to read the mindset of the individuals there, and that's, but physically, there's a situation, yes.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Redirect.
Yeah, briefly. Mr. Tisa, real quick, I'm not going to keep you on the stand too long. When you testified, you said that you explained to the jury exactly what the apparatus looks like when you fire it.
We took a frame that holds cardboard, typical targeting, and then we put the target that we're shooting at on that so we could examine the location. And we attempt to look at the scene that we were dealing with and try to replicate that by firing the weapon under those conditions.
And by firing the weapon, are you simply just moving your finger like this?
Yes.
Okay. You'll agree with me there's a difference between shooting a firearm with accuracy and simply pulling your trigger.
Objection, leading.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the objection.
Leading.
Sustained.
Is there a difference between shooting a firearm with skill versus simply pulling a trigger?
Yes. What we were doing was pulling the trigger to time the cycle of operation to go through 8 rounds. We weren't aiming it like a shooter would might possibly stick his arm out or use the sights. We were just pressing the trigger in a rapid fashion to accumulate time.
As quickly as you could, correct?
Yes.
How old are you? Are you over 40?
Oh, 74.
Okay, you're 74. Do you know how old Mr. Medina was?
Not at the time. No, I think.
Younger than 74?
Yes.
Do you agree with me that an average person...
Objection, leading.
Moving through it.
Okay, thank you.
To your knowledge, do people slow down over age in terms of their reflex times?
Objection beyond the scope.
Overruled. Only if you know, sir. Do not guess or assume.
I can attest to it personally, yes.
Thanks a lot.
Mr. Tisa, you are excused.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor.
Defense, would you like to call your next witness, please?
We're going to need to discuss something outside the presence of the jury, Judge.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let us take a 10-minute recess. Please remember all rules and orders as always. We will see you at 3:20.